Congratulations! If you're watching this video, you are about to begin the process of speech writing. The body of a speech is phase one of the speech writing process. Before now, you've chosen a topic, you know what your general purpose is, and you have your specific purpose. Now it's time to put those pieces together. This is the reason we are here. So what is the body of a speech? As the longest and most important part of your speech, the body is phase one in speech development. The body is composed of the central feature of your speech, the main points you want your audience to remember. The flow for this presentation will be 1. Organizing main points, 2. Tips for preparing main points, 3. Connecting ideas, and 4. Supporting materials. So, what are main points? Main points are the central features of your speech. They are the nuggets of information you want your audience to remember if and when they forget everything else. Before this time, you have been researching your topic, or you've been brainstorming the things that you want to speak about. When you put together your main points, this is the time that you pick out those 2 to 5 ideas or nuggets that you want your audience to really hold on to and that you will support with supporting material later. So here are a few main point expectations. First, choose only 2 to 5 main points. Most likely your speech isn't going to be really long, so choosing from 2 to 5 main points is a good idea for speech development. Usually the sweet spot is 3. Secondly, select your main points carefully. Remember, these are the nuggets of information you want your audience to remember if they don't remember anything else, so choose wisely. Third, make sure to phrase your main points precisely. Less is more. The idea behind this is, if you give your audience just small snippets or chunks of information, it will be more likely they'll remember these details later on. If the main points are really long and drawn out and very wordy, it's less likely your audience members will be able to quickly remember what those main points were of your speech. And fourth, arrange your main points strategically. Once you've decided what you want to talk about, how you arrange them is really important. As I just mentioned, arranging your main points is very important. So let's talk about how you do that. You need to choose a specific speech design or order. We'll go over those now. First is a chronological order, or maybe you'll choose a spatial order, possibly a causal order, or maybe even a topical order. Let's talk about each one of those in depth. A chronological order is where you order your main points in a time pattern. This is very similar to writing an essay. So maybe you will go from present to the past, or present to the future, or vice versa. The spatial order is directional. Imagine you're giving a speech about all of the national parks in the United States. You may want to use a directional pattern. For instance, you may want to start from the East Coast, go to the Midwest, the South, and then the East Coast. That would be ordering your speech in a directional pattern. A causal pattern is when you're ordering your speech in a cause and effect relationship. So your main points are main points about the cause, and then the next main point would be about the effect. And lastly, topical order. This is when you're ordering your main points into a logical and consistent subtopic. For instance, maybe you're doing a speech on fireworks, the different types of fireworks. Well, you may want to use a topical order because a time pattern, a spatial pattern, or a causal order does not really fit. So maybe what you would do was you would decide to talk about fireworks that are ones that are on the ground. Then you might want to talk about fireworks that are kind of in a tube and they shoot, and then maybe you want to talk about fireworks that shoot into the sky. Or possibly you want to talk about fireworks that are illegal, fireworks that are legal, and fireworks that you can make on your own. I don't even know if that's possible, but let's just say. So those are the 4 typical speech designs that you may want to use to organize your main points. So now let's talk about some tips for preparing those main points. You know what they are. You've decided to arrange them in a certain speech design. Now let's talk about the tips. First, make sure to keep your main points separate. What I mean by this is make sure you don't have an and in there where you're really talking about 2 main points, but you've kind of shoved them together. Make sure that they're nice and separate. Second, try to use the same pattern of wording. I'm going to come back to this main point, but basically what I mean here is think about the audience. You want them to you want your main points to be easily recognizable for your audience. So using the same word pattern is really helpful. Third, balance time devoted to each main point. Make sure each main point is substantial enough and important enough for your audience to remember. So if you have a speech, make sure you spend 1 minute talking about main point 1, another minute talking about main point 2, and your third minute talking about main point 3. It's unbalanced if you spend 2 minutes talking about your first main point and then rush through main point 2 and 3 and only talk about them for 30 seconds. So really make sure that the time and energy devoted to each main point is as equal and balanced as possible. And lastly, use simple and precise language. I talked about this a little bit earlier. The main point is that you want your audience to remember those nuggets of information. So if your language is simple and precise, it's not long and drawn out with a lot of complicated words, it's much easier for your audience members to remember those nuggets and then possibly remember some supporting information. So let's talk a little bit more about that preparing point 2, which is try to use the same pattern of wording. Okay, so using the same pattern of wording. This is extremely helpful for the audience. As a speaker, you may feel that it's a lot of repetition or really not exciting. However, we are audience-centered as speakers, so we really want the audience to be able to pick up on our cues. So here's an example of 3 main points that have the same pattern of wording. So number 1, eating a healthy breakfast causes less fat in your diet. Main point 2, eating a healthy breakfast allows us to start the day with energy. And main point 3, eating a healthy breakfast has been linked to positive health outcomes. As you can see, starting your main points out with eating a healthy breakfast for each of the main points will be a great way to indicate to the audience that these are main points in your speech. So now you have your main points. You know what they are. They're organized into a pattern that works best for your topic. You've decided to make sure there's only 2 to 5. They sound the same. How do we connect the main points together? Well, using transitions, signposts, internal previews, and internal summaries are great ways to join thoughts together and help the audience understand the relationship between your main points. Let's start with transitions. Transitions are a word or phrase that indicates when a speaker has finished one thought and is moving on to the other. An example of transition might be, now let's get to the reason why we're really here. Okay. It is important to remember that I require at least 2 transitions in your speeches. I require one between the introduction and the body of the speech, and the second between the body and the conclusion of the speech. Signposts are another great way of connecting your main points. Signposts are a very brief statement that indicates where a speaker is in the speech, or that focuses attention on a key idea. An example of a signpost might be something like this. The second step of the process is, or maybe starting off a main point with lastly, or possibly in your speech saying, we are now halfway through the blank process. These are all great ways of giving signposts to the audience, letting them know where they are in the speech. Here's an example of some signposts in the main points of a speech. So before we were trying to use the same pattern of wording, now we're adding signposts. So first, eating a healthy breakfast causes less fat in your diet. Second, eating a healthy breakfast allows us to start the day with energy. And third, eating a healthy breakfast has linked to positive health outcomes. As you can see, these main points are really connected. You have signposts giving these audience an idea of where you are in the speech, first, second, and third. And then you also have your same patterning to really hone in on the fact that these are important key points in the speech. Internal previews. An internal preview is a statement in the body of the speech that lets the audience know what the speaker is going to discuss next. Now, internal previews are not mandatory, but they are extremely helpful in your speech development and delivery. Let's talk about some example statements. An example might be, now I'm going to share with you about blank, or maybe even, let's shift perspectives and talk about blank. Both of these statements are verbal cues for the audience that you're done talking about one thing and plan to talk about something else. Internal summaries are similar to internal previews. However, internal summaries are a statement in the body of the speech that summarizes the speaker's preceding point or points. Now again, internal summaries are not mandatory, but they are extremely helpful in the creation of your speech. So let's talk about some example statements. One might be, I just shared with you about blank. Or maybe even, it's important to remember blank. Okay, so now what's next? You have your main points, they're organized, you're using signposts, possibly some internal summaries, and some internal previews. So what comes next? The next thing we need to do is develop supporting materials to help the audience accept your main points. If you don't have supporting materials, the audience is just left with your assertions. Supporting materials. The three major kinds of supporting materials are examples, statistics, and testimony. Make sure to organize your supporting materials so that they are directly relevant to the main points they are supposed to support. There's nothing worse than developing some supporting materials that have no connection to the main points. It really confuses the audience. Congratulations! You have just finished phase 1 of the body. This is the whole reason why we're here as far as developing a speech. The body is the meat of the sandwich. It's the longest part of your speech. You want to devote most of your time and energy into developing the main points, making sure your supporting materials are relevant, and including signposts and transitions and summaries so that your audience can easily follow along with your train of thought. Great work.